Okay, so Dr. Fragman is here with me to go over our map data and show how the district uses map data to plan, to set goals, things like that. So,
well, the one thing that we do, Amy, in our district, where we're very fortunate that we have Data Director as our system. When the state releases all of our information, we get it into what we call a raw score format.
mm-hmm.
When we get the raw score, we're still right now in what they call this embargoed scenario. It's an unofficial record, but they give us the data to look at. So we can look at students at the elementary, middle, and high school level with basic, below basic, proficient, and advanced scores. And we can get all of that and we put it into our system. And when we have a system for the map scores itself, what I'm able to do for our people is then we create what we call the CSV files. Once we get all of that put in, we put it at the middle or put it at each building level. The first thing that we do at the central office level is look at it from our academic service team. And once we get that, we kind of go building by building. Once we go building by building, then we can match it to what happens at the middle school level. And this year, we're at a little bit of a mercy of DESE because they have not released our end-of-course exams for the high school, which are Algebra 1, 2, Biology, and American Government.
Okay.
So we're still in a holding pattern for that part. So we're kind of waiting for all of that to occur.
Now, is it typical for DESE to hold the EOC scores, or are they just running behind?
They are. There's two things that happened this year. They released the scores early, but they found out that there was a glitch in one of their testing platforms.
Okay.
We have two systems in the state of Missouri. We have the eDirect system for our elementary and middle school, and then we have a Questar platform which is called iTester.
Okay, yeah.
At the secondary level. There was some miscalculation formula for a couple of areas that they're just trying to verify that they're correct. We also had an area where for 2.5 hours on one particular day that affected our district is that the system was completely shut down and we had kids that were waiting to test. So what the district or what the state has done is created a technical advisory council to look at the data statewide to make sure that there's nothing that's invalid from all aspects of all the districts. Once we get that, we've been put in this holding pattern until they can look at it. So we're almost ready, but we keep getting updates that they are going to be meeting this week.
Mm-hmm.
And surely we're hoping by the 1st of September that we can do that. Why that's critical for a district of our size is that we're looking at it from a 3 through 12 standpoint, and those are our testing years. And it all figures into our MSIP 5 projection of the annual performance rate, which is what we fondly call the APR system. So with that in mind, we can only calculate a little bit of our K through 8. We are a district of about 1,400 students per grade level, so you can see where that has an effect for our 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And we're looking at biology, American government. We usually have about 1,200 to 1,300 students that sit for that. And that affects all 4 of our high schools. So that's part of the system with it. The plus that we have, if I can just show you briefly, when I can pull up in our system, is we get the raw formula from our state, and we calculate for the year. So right now, we don't have the data pieces in place for that. So if I go back and look at calculations for take out the 17-18 because we still don't have all the data files for the high school, I click on our year system and I can go back and retreat. And then we look at what you can see as our raw scores with this.
Okay.
So with my assistant team and everything, it's thinking.
Yes.
Because it's running almost 12,000 reports for us right now. What I can go through is then we can see, and as you can see on the screen, and knowing that we can't show student data on video, but you can see where it calculates all of our kids' scores. And this is what I can do then is we have a chart now for every student, and I can pull this into what we call our Excel forms as well, or our CSV forms. And again, it populates this. And I can break out all of our scores by ELA, by our MAPS kids, by our science kids, and I can calculate it from each of our buildings. So what I just pulled down is the raw data into this piece, and then you can see where it goes through, and look, there's your name,
Yeah.
and it's attached to all of this. How I can do this a little bit further is then I can funnel the data,
Okay.
and I can make this teacher accessible.
Mm-hmm.
I can make it building administrator accessible, or what we call in our district teaching and learning coaches. They have this data as well.
Okay.
So it tells everyone their score as well as how close they were to the advanced mark, how close they were to the proficient, and what the kids need to do to go a little bit further with that.
So these are their scale scores right here.
That's correct. And you could see also we're able to identify. So if I wanted to pull up just the basic number here, I can go through and calculate and do a running sample and put up their scaled scores, match it to what we want to see as a calculation. And then our curriculum teams also go a little bit further and can take this and see, wow, we're nailing this aligned standard pretty well with that. But overall, if I'm looking at all 20 buildings at the elementary level, and we have a standard that shows consistently low, that's a red flag to us that we need to align our standards a little bit differently to what our curriculum is going.
I know the last couple of years the DESE hasn't put out like a item benchmark descriptor, and I know that's because we've had such a switch with going from Common Core and now to MLS. Do you see them or foresee them coming back to giving us the IBD reports?
Absolutely.
Because as a teacher, I lived by the IBD report, and I feel like I'm flying blind.
And this year, you are not going to have to fly blind. They have already entered them. So I'll close out of this. And what we have, again, we're waiting on DESE to finalize all of their pieces with it. But when I calculate, and from the secure site, from the DESE website, and this is from my level, but I go into the guided inquiry piece, and then I can go down to the accountability form. And since I have access to everybody's data within the district, I can go and create all the way down to the item benchmark data reports or summary reports. And if I want to look at the breakout by standards, all I have to do is put the years in. Now, as I told you before, 17's data is not all the way in.
Okay.
So how do I get through the IBD reports is then I go back up into the state assessments, and I have 4 different areas that I can go through. Administrative, the achievement levels, the historical AYP, which is your yearly progress, and that was back in our No Child Left Behind years. And then what they've done is the content standard already. So I can go through and look at our item analysis, or the IBDs is what we used to call them, and I can collect North Kansas City. You'll have to edit that. Our district, sorry. And then you can go through and put, for example, if you want to look at your building particularly, I can pull this. And let's just say mathematics. If I wanted to look at just what you needed for yours, and again, it gives us a group listing for everybody. And it already tells me, because when our Power School system, we load in exactly what areas you're teaching. And it takes a little bit while, but once it loads, it has to go through all the state files everywhere. It has to take your district's files and reload those. And then once we get all of those, you'll be able to see exactly the item analysis standards as they're going through. And probably with the weather occurring right at the moment, it's going to be slower, and it's the end of the day. But
yeah, I didn't know you could break it down by teacher.
Can take all that, and this is every student now. You can see it has your name associated with it, and you'll see how many sessions asked those certain questions. And you'll see how many kids got them correct or not. So if I was going to create this for you, which I will go ahead and do since you're sitting here, again, I can use the CSV file, but right now I'm going to I put a lot of our stuff for our teachers into the Excel file so you can manipulate your own data. And as it, again, thanks. And the caution that I give to a lot of people, but you'll see where it just has the year, and anything that is marked with the blue highlights from the state level, it should be able to open that document. There we go.
Okay.
And now it doesn't go by student, but you'll be able to see, of course, the MLS codes as you're going through it. So I'm going to save this, and I will send it to you electronically after this is over. That way it's on it, and I'll just put, so you know it's yours. And I can do this for every building. Most people are able to what we call affectionately as phishing, but we teach people to how to go through and find their own. But a lot of times administrators don't have time. The TLCs have other obligations, and I'm able to do that from my office. With that data, then you're able to start planning what you need for the following school year.
Because we're not quite into content. We're still doing our beginning of the year. So knowing where my kids struggled last year helps me to focus. I know it's a different cohort this year, but knowing where they struggled last year helps me too.
Absolutely. Where you're at an advantage with this is how it differs a little bit from the high school level is that you have your students that are in 6th grade that are tracking now to 7th grade, and you can start seeing the district's piece on the 6th grade and see how much it is manipulated up to the 7th grade. So you can kind of get a vertical alignment with what's happening in your building as well. We can also see this globally, and we can put all the teachers that are teaching the particular content that you do, and then we can see if there are similarities, strengths, or weaknesses.
Across buildings or
Absolutely.
You could do it across like all middle school, across the whole district, and say, as a district, we're really struggling in this concept.
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, when we're looking at the map data piece, you saw where it's broken out by the raw score. This takes it and goes a little bit by line item by item by the standard. And you can see over here is where, for example, there was only one question, but it looks like it was a response question.
Right.
And we got a certain percentage on that one. So that may have you go through and look at, okay, how many questions are asked, and do they align particularly with what that test item was going through?
Right.
Here's where we may be at a disadvantage, because this is supposedly the last year that we can do it, because there's going to be new testing items. But you can still see some similarities that are going to happen.
I know with 7th grade, we haven't had a lot of switch from Common Core to MLS. A lot of in 7th grade at least, our standards are fairly the same. There's not a lot of changes to 7th grade versus like 6th grade. I know there were a ton of changes to the 6th grade, but 7th grade and 8th grade luckily have not changed drastically from the switch from one to the other.
And what we have noticed from people that have written some of the test questions, or what we have heard from across the state, is that they are very similar. So there's not going to be a whole lot of change. However, there will be some changes, but nothing that we can't handle as far as we go through that.
So then this information, is this also sent out to Dr. Sutton and his team, and Dr. Hackett and her team, and then they funnel it down to each building level?
Absolutely, they can. And our TLCs, or our instructional coaches, also do that as well. So they can go through and manipulate the data, so it's like what I just did for you. It's content specific for your particular classes, and you can see through it. So
I used to color code all
mine. Oh yes, and I go through, and depending on the level, what we can do is when we put this into a CDS chart, is that when I do a pivot table, we can go through and say if it's a 70% or higher, we highlight. And I mean, you know all the tricks of the trade with that. But so we are getting them for this year. We don't know what's going to happen for next year, but absolutely can go in and manipulate. Your building's TLC already has access to all this, and she's able to help guide all of those pieces as well.
So what's TE mean right there? Question type, is that?
This is multiple choice. This is a constructed response. Let's see. I have to look at our other forms to find out. I think that one is the teacher. TE is actually when you're, they had a couple of pilot questions that we're going through.
Okay.
So those are field test items.
Okay.
So those don't typically count on
Right.
the score. But that was, yeah. They manipulate in the, but they don't come out on the final numbers that you go through.
Right.
So that is everything in a nutshell for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Love doing this.